Yo, what is going on, everyone? My name is Nick, or the Notorious Fantasy, and in today's video, we're going to be breaking down my top 36 wide receiver rankings and tiers for week number 3 of the 2024 fantasy football season. But before we could get into things, I would like to ask that if you guys are new to the channel and you do end up enjoying today's video, that you please make sure to hit that subscribe button down below. And while you're down there, whether you are new to the channel or not, please make sure that you do leave a like on today's video. It would help me out a ton. If you want to follow me on Twitter or X, please do so at NotoriousFantasy. So without further ado, let's get on into my week number 3 top 36 wide receiver rankings and tiers for the 2024 fantasy football season. We begin with the first tier at the wide receiver position on the week with the must-start wide receiver ones. These are the guys that you don't even need to rub two brain cells together to figure out that you need to start them. That would be CeeDee Lamb, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Justin Jefferson, Rashee Rice, Nico Collins, Ja'Marr Chase, as well as Maserati Marv. At number 1, we have CeeDee Lamb going up against the Baltimore Ravens at home in Jerry's World. Now, the matchup here is definitely delectable. I really do believe that the Baltimore Ravens defense is going to get a train ran on them in this game. And based upon how the Dallas Cowboys defense has looked, this game has all the makings of being a tit-for-tat, rock'em sock'em robots high-scoring affair. CeeDee Lamb hasn't really had that huge game yet this season, though he hasn't been a complete and utter disaster. Based upon where you drafted him in fantasy football drafts, we are just going to assume that the Dallas Cowboys offense figures things out. I don't think they're fully broken. After 2 weeks, I still believe CeeDee Lamb is one of the best, if not the best, wide receiver in the NFL, and I'm going to fire him up with supreme confidence as my wide receiver 1 on the week. At number 2, we got Amon-Ra St. Brown. Now, week number 1 was a bit of a doozy for Amon-Ra St. Brown, but last week, the motherfucker saw 18 targets up against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. As the wide receiver number 10, this is another game that reeks of points, reeks of being a high-scoring, back-and-forth affair, and I think that Amon-Ra St. Brown is going to finish as a top 3 wide receiver on the week, and I think Marvin Harrison Jr., who my wide receiver 7 is, also has a good chance at doing so. At number 3, we got Justin Jefferson of the cold like Minnesota Vikings going up against the Houston Texans. Now, this matchup is definitely tough. The Texans defense is solid, but death taxes Justin Jefferson top 10 wide receiver. I don't really care that Sam Darnold isn't the best quarterback on earth. But, and this is a big but, shout out Mia Malkova, Sam Darnold has been fantastic thus far this season. I said all summer that Kevin O'Connell is a genius. It doesn't matter if it's me, you out there at the quarterback position. Justin Jefferson will flourish. That has been the case thus far. Justin Jefferson, another one of these guys you can argue is the best wide receiver in the NFL, and I'm going to rank him this high every single week, and he deserves it based upon what we have seen through the start of the season. Next up, we got Rashee Rice, and while Travis Kelce has been left out to dry in this offense, Rashee Rice has been feasting. Back-to-back solid performances out of Rashee Rice. The Atlanta Falcons defensively don't look the best, but the offense does look like they're pushing things into high gear. Kirk Cousins looks better, which could lead to this matchup being a boat race. Rashee Rice feels incredibly consistent while also feeling like he has a ton of upside due to the offense of the Chiefs. And the Chiefs are a team that any given game could score 30 plus points. They don't have Isaiah Pacheco, and I think that's going to lead to them relying heavily on the pass. At number 5, we got Nico Collins going up against the Minnesota Vikings in Minnesota. Wide receiver number 4 last week, wide receiver 13 in week number 1. He has been dealing with a hip/foot injury, but everything that I have read would tell us that Nico Collins is going to be good to go on Sunday. The matchup up against the Vikings on paper isn't the best, but Nico Collins is the clear number 1 wide receiver on a CJ Stroud offense, so you got to believe in him. At number 6, we got Ja'Marr Chase going up against the Washington Commanders in Cincinnati on Monday Night Football. Now, this is a wet dream matchup. This is one of the easiest matchups for a wide receiver. The Washington Commanders defense is straight up ass. But, and this is a big but, shout out Violet Myers, Ja'Marr Chase hasn't looked the best through the first 2 games, and Joe Shiesty, hasn't been the best either. Ultimately, I'm not going to bury him too much because this is the perfect get-right game, but I'd be lying if I said I wasn't at least a smidgen worried. Next up, we move to Maserati Marv going up against the Detroit Lions. The narrative after week 1 was, Nick, oh my God, you're such an idiot telling everyone to draft Marvin Harrison Jr. He had 1 fantasy point in his debut. Let's throw him down the river, right? Let's give him a Salem witch trial level death, right? That's what they were thinking for Maserati Marv. He can't play ball, has 1 down game, he's running slow, and then the next week he backhanded the Rams defense, Will Smith style. He scored 2 touchdowns over 130 yards, and he should have had 3 touchdowns in that game. Marvin Harrison, like I said all summer long, like that Kid Rock song, is that Marvin Harrison Jr. is instantly one of the best wide receivers in the NFL. This is another matchup that's going to be very high scoring, and I think Marvin Harrison Jr. has a shot to repeat as the number 1 receiver. Next up, we move to the second tier at the wide receiver position that I will describe as also must starts, but they're just lower end wide receiver ones compared to the high end guys. At number 8, we got Devontae Smith going up against the New Orleans Saints in New Orleans. Without A.J. Brown, that is going to put Devontae Smith into the driver's seat of this offense. I get that the Saints defense are far from pushovers, but based upon how the Eagles offense has looked through the first 2 games, and based upon the fact that Devontae Smith is now the clear, undisputed wide receiver 1 in an offense that could score 30 plus points, you're going to want to start Devontae Smith. I do have him ranked higher than he has finished yet this season, but it's just a 2-game sample size, and I think the wide receiver 8 will definitely be very easy to obtain for a guy that could see 10 plus targets in this spot. Next up, we move to Chris Godwin going up against the Denver Broncos. Back-to-back games inside of the top 8, so it would be disrespectful to Chris Godwin to rank him outside of the top 8. Chris Godwin is another wide receiver that I was banging the drum for all offseason long, giving him the gawk 9,000 special, and it has paid dividends. Back-to-back weeks with 8 targets, back-to-back weeks with 80 plus yards, and back-to-back weeks with a touchdown. The talk all summer was that they were going to get Chris Godwin more involved, get him more involved in the slot, which is something they didn't do last season, and it has been paying dividends. Chris Godwin has been wiping the floor with defenses while Mike Evans is going to get potentially locked up, don't let me out, by Pat Surtain. Chris Godwin's going to go pound town on these other corners that are just straight up dookie on the Broncos. So Chris Godwin feels like a stone cold lock to be a top 8 wide receiver. Next up, we got Davante Adams. Now, this matchup has me salivating. This matchup has me going to sleep bricked up on Saturday night, just envisioning Adams up against the Panthers defense. But there is one downfall. There is a chink in the armor of Davante Adams, and that is going to be the fact that the quarterback play is pretty mid. Week 1 up against the Chargers, I expected a huge showing. He was the wide receiver 37. He followed things up as the wide receiver 5 last week. If the quarterback play was better, if I trusted the team more, Davante Adams would be a top 3 wide receiver in my rankings, but because of the quarterback play and because of the fact that I feel like even in a great matchup like this, there's a chance that the Raiders are stumbling and bumbling, even though they just beat the Ravens, makes me a little bit less confident, so I bumped him down into the second tier. Next up, we got Mike Evans going up against the Denver Broncos. Mike Evans kicked down the door of the Commanders in week 1, 2 touchdowns, wide receiver 6. Last week, not as hot, wide receiver 49. He is going up against Pat Surtain, but if anyone is going to moss Pat Surtain Jr. in the end zone, it would be Mike Evans. I get that the matchup should make you a little bit less optimistic, but when push comes to shove, Mike Evans is just too good to be ranked lower than this. Next up, we got Brandon Ayuk. No Deebo Samuel. More likely, no Christian McCaffrey either. So obviously no Christian McCaffrey. More than likely, no George Kittle either is what I meant to say. Brandon Ayuk is the only motherfucker out there. Everyone all summer, everyone all last year makes the jokes, hey, big cock Brock Purdy is only good because he's got the Avengers around him, and Now the Avengers have been Thanos snapped off the earth. It's just Brock Purdy and Brandon Ayuk. Now that might lead to Brandon Ayuk getting triple covered. And I get that Brandon Ayuk has been unsuccessful through the first 2 games of the season, but the Rams defense does not look good. Marvin Harrison Jr. just ripped them a new one, and Brandon Ayuk being the only guy there, you just have to know the targets are going to come heavy his way. Next up, we move into the 3rd tier, which is the high-end wide receiver 2s, beginning with Zay Flowers going up against the Dallas Cowboys in Jerry's World. Again, like we talked about with CeeDee Lamb, I think this matchup is going to be very high scoring. Zay Flowers was the wide receiver 11 last week, and he would have finished much higher in week number 1 if Lamar Jackson didn't have his poor accuracy and was able to actually hit Zay Flowers wide open in the end zone. Back-to-back games with 10 targets. He's the clear number 1 wide receiver on this team. While there is some inconsistencies out of Lamar Jackson himself when it comes to passing, ultimately, it is basically impossible to rank a guy that's going to see more than likely 8 or more targets, potentially 10 or 12 targets on an offense that's going to be able to score a bunch of points. An explosive wide receiver like Zay Flowers, he belongs here as a high-end wide receiver too. Next up, we got Chris Olave. Now, while Chris Olave definitely looked a lot better last week, and he was definitely a lot more involved in the offense last week, I still have my qualms with Chris Olave, which is it almost feels like he is a castaway, shout out Wilson, in this offense, right? That they love Shaheed. They love Alvin Kamara. They love Alvin Kamara. And Chris Olave kind of feels like the guy chilling in the cuck chair on the corner. Now, does that mean that Chris Olave can't go out here and lay down the pipe like he's a plumber? Of course he can do that. The matchup points towards him being able to do that. But something deep down just tells me that we can't rank him higher because we just haven't seen it yet this season, and the targets just might not be there for him. Ultimately, though, you're still going to start him. Next up, we got Tyreek Hill. Now, it hurts me deeply as a Dolphins fan when I saw Tua Tagovailoa go down. Felt like I got shot directly in the heart. It hurt me everywhere. The Dolphins were getting bent over a table without the use of lube, no Diddy. And then we lose Tua. And basically at that point, my heart was ripped in two. Now, can Tyreek Hill be good with Skylar Thompson? Yeah, he can. But should we rank him like we used to? No. Because Skylar Thompson, while everyone likes to make fun of Tua, is nowhere near the level of Tua Tagovailoa. And the offense is going to maneuver differently. The offense is going to love to run the ball at a much higher clip now without Tua Tagovailoa. Now, Tyreek Hill could take any screen to the crib. He could take a slant to the crib. You could hand him the ball, and he could take it 99 yards straight to the house like he has a street NFL street video game breaker activated, right? Tyreek Hill is amazing, but the quarterback play gives him a bump down. Next up, we move to Malik Neighbors going up against the Cleveland Browns in Cleveland. Now, this matchup is rough, right? He goes from one of the easiest matchups in the Commanders to one of the hardest matchups. The guy had over a 60% target share in the offense last week. So even if the Cleveland Browns defense is as good as I believe they are going to be, Malik Neighbors is going to get fed. The motherfucker had 7 targets in week 1, 18 last week. Due to the amount of sheer volume he's going to get, that is going to make him safe, and he has that top 5 upside. Obviously, there's always the downfall of, hey, Daniel Jones is trash. I get it. I know he's bad, but if the volume continues to be that heavy towards Neighbors, it's going to be hard for him to bust. Pause. Next up, we move to Jameson Williams going up against the Arizona Cardinals in Arizona. Back-to-back solid games out of Jameson Williams, and JMO has went from a long ball merchant, a 2-3 targets a game merchant where he catches 1, takes it to the crib, and that gives her a good game, to being a guy that has seen 9 or more targets in back-to-back weeks. Now, I am hesitant to truly put the crown onto the head of Jameson Williams because obviously they have Amon-Ra St. Brown, and because I think everyone has kind of just pushed aside. They've stiff-armed Mr. Sam Laporta, that this is going to be the game where Laporta has like 12 targets, 100 yards, 2 touchdowns. But again, this is a great matchup for J-Mo. This is a game where he could easily put up 100+ yards and a touchdown like he did in week number 1. So while I have been given a little bit of the Suka-Lamink, a little of the spank and tickle to Mr. Sam Laporta, I still think Jameson Williams deserves a spot inside of the top 24. Next up, we got Drizzy Drake London going up against the Kansas City Chiefs. Now, the matchup here is not great for Drizzy Drake London, but the team did involve him a lot more in week 2, and Kirk Cousins also looked way better in week 2 compared to week 1, and I feel as though Kirk Cousins is going to continue to get better. Every single week, he is going to play better, which is going to point towards Drake London maybe coming out the gate slow, like in week 1 as the wide receiver 80, then he picks things up as the wide receiver 19 last week. Then maybe this week, I've got him ranked as the wide receiver 19 where he finished last week. Maybe he finishes as like the wide receiver 24, 25. But then as the season keeps going on, I think he could really end up being a reliable top 12 wide receiver. If he sees 7 targets like he did last week, I think he's a pretty safe bet to finish inside of the top 24. And I do like him slightly more than Metcalf. Now, Metcalf last week made me look stupid. I thought against Christian Gonzalez, DK Metcalf wouldn't have a great game. Technically, I think Christian Gonzalez had a really good game against DK Metcalf. Metcalf was just eating when it wasn't up against Christian Gonzalez. I don't love what I've seen out of Jalen Ramsey this season. He clearly looks hurt, but Jalen Ramsey is also really good, even when hurt. So Metcalf might be on the struggle bus in this game. JSN has been revitalized, but they probably won't have Kenneth Walker, so they are going to try to throw the ball a little bit more. Metcalf saw 14 targets last week. I expect that to come back down to earth. The upside is certainly there, though, and if I'm being honest, if you guys understand how tiers work, I guess I should explain this if you don't understand. While I have Metcalf the lowest in this tier, if you said, Nick, I would rather have Metcalf over Flowers, I'm not going to sit there in the comment section and have a full-on war in the comment section about it. Why? Because they're in the same tier. Now, if you wanted to rank DK Metcalf ahead of Jamar Chase or Marvin Harrison or Mike Evans, Devontae Adams, the guys in the tiers above, then there would be an argument to be made about it. But when you're in the same tier, the rankings change every single day. If you're on the Patreon, you can subscribe down below for $7.50 where I post the rankings. I make changes every single day. Guys move up a couple of spots. They move down. So you can view that in the rankings. So again, while I do have Metcalf as the wide receiver number 19, he's technically the wide receiver 20 because I had Garrett Wilson as the wide receiver 8. They do fluctuate, and when they are in the same tier, it is very, very close to me. Next up, we move into the 4th tier here, which is the mid-tier wide receiver 2s to the high-end wide receiver 3s. These are still guys that you want to start, but you start to get into the range where there are a lot more question marks. The guy with the least amount of question marks is probably Rashid Shaheed, who has had 2 top 15 games in a row. But what I will say is when you're getting 4 and 5 targets a game and you're busting off these huge receiving touchdowns, one of these days, you're bound to get up to bat and strike out. You're bound not to hit the ball directly out of the park. You're bound to not hit a 700-foot home run, which is what Rashid Shaheed has been doing. Now, Derek Carr looks revitalized. Derek Carr looks amazing. So you can't bury Rashid Shaheed just because he's getting 4 or 5 targets. But one of these days, Olave is going to go crazy. One of these days, Kamara is also going to go crazy. And Shaheed's going to have a down game. But based upon what we have seen with Rashid Shaheed, I'm not ranking him any lower than this. The question, though, is why is he not ranked a little bit higher? Because of the target share. But again, back-to-back games inside the top 15. Great matchup against the Eagles. He could certainly find the end zone in this game. Before we move on into the rest of the wide receivers in today's video, I would like to give you guys a quick word for our friends and our sponsor over at Underdog Fantasy. If you guys are new to Underdog Fantasy and sign up using code Notorious, you'll be able to claim a free pick plus a first-time deposit offer of up to $1,000 in bonus cash. Again, promo code Notorious, or by clicking on the link in the video description. The free pick for this weekend is going to be Patrick Mahomes higher than half of a total yard. You match Patrick Mahomes with any other pick on Sunday or one of the 2 games on Monday, one of the players in those games, and you receive 3 times what you put into your pick'em. If you put in more than 2 picks, the payout will obviously be higher. Again, make sure you guys check out promo code Notorious to claim your free pick higher than half of a total yard with Pat Mahomes, plus a first-time deposit offer of up to $1,000 in bonus cash. So back on into things here. After Shaheed, we move to Michael Pittman Jr. Now, Rashid Shaheed and Michael Pittman Jr., they're on 2 polar opposite sides of the spectrum. Rashid Shaheed, low target share, but is fucking Hulk smashing. Whereas Michael Pittman Jr. getting a lot of targets, 7-8 targets a week, but has done diddly squat with it. The matchup up against the Bears isn't the best, but it almost feels like if you're getting 7 or 8 targets a game, eventually the chakras are going to align. Eventually the moons are going to align, and something's just going to come correct for Michael Pittman Jr. Next up, we got Wiki DJ Moore going up against the Indianapolis Colts in Indianapolis. I have DJ Moore ranked lower than consensus, and it's just because of Caleb Williams. I will tell you, it feels crystal clear that DJ Moore is the number 1 receiver in this offense, especially since I do not believe Keenan Allen will play. But the problem lies in the heart of Caleb Williams. If the guy continues to go out there and shit the bed time in and time out, how can I rank DJ Moore higher? Because the quarterback play is just weighing him down. Next up, we move to JSN, going up against the Miami Dolphins. Now, last week, JSN went nuclear, 16 targets, 12 receptions, 117 yards, 24 fantasy points as the wide receiver 8. So, 2 polar opposite games. The guy week 1 comes out the gate in a great matchup against the Denver Broncos, 2 targets. Then up against the Patriots, 16 targets. A small sample size. Do we believe what we heard all summer, which is that the coaching staff wants JSN to be heavily involved? Or do we believe what we saw in week number 1, which was that he wasn't super involved? It's probably going to be a lot more in the middle, which makes me pretty confident in saying that he's a guy that you want in your lineup. Next up, we got Calvin Ridley going up against the Green Bay Packers, the Cheeseheads at home in Tennessee. Revenge game for Malik Willis, as I would be perplexed if Jordan Love played. Calvin Ridley was amazing last week. 6 targets, 4 receptions, 77 yards, 1 rush, 10 yards, 2 total touchdowns as the wide receiver number 7. They're still ramping DeAndre Hopkins up. Once DeAndre Hopkins gets to his full power level, once it's over 9,000, then I think it might become Jover for Calvin Ridley as like the clear number 1 wide receiver option on this team. Relying on Will Levis is like relying on the girl that you just met who said that she was on the pill and you're just gonna fucking blow your wad inside of her, right? You shouldn't rely on it, just like you shouldn't rely on Will Levis. Will Levis is literally negative safety. That guy will run around like a chicken with his head cut off behind the offensive line, and instead of taking a sack like his name was Riley Reid, the guy goes ahead and just throws a missile, fucking Kim Jong-un, straight to the defense. So while I love Calvin Ridley, I loved him last year, I think the guy's immensely talented, I just can't move him higher because of Will Levis. Next up, we got Jalen waddled away, waddle, till the very next day, bump, bada bum. Now, Waddle, just like Tyreek, this is bad because Tua is not there. Now, on the scale of 1 to fucked, Tyreek is at like a 5. Waddle is at like a 9, right? He is booked. He is screwed by this because, McDaniel's just going to dial up somehow 8 targets for Skylar to throw to Tyreek. Just 8 plays that are straight up feed the ball to Tyreek. Whereas Waddle just doesn't get that treatment. He's down on the totem pole. While Waddle is an amazing wide receiver, and while Waddle could rip off literally the wide receiver 1 game because he's that good, quarterback change to Skylar, who I don't believe in, to changing up. Yeah, it's really just, the game plan is just not going to go the way of Waddle, more than likely. And the quarterback change just makes us have to bury Waddle down the rankings. Stephon Diggs up next. Diggs, clearly, I would say, in my book, he's the wide receiver 2 to 3 on this team. Deco is the clear number 1, the head of the table, solo Sokoa. So Stephon Diggs, wide receiver 9 in week 1. That's because he scored two touchdowns. Last week, he doesn't get the 2 touchdowns, and he's the wide receiver, 45 and 2 zigzags. Now he's going up against the Vikings. A revenge game, but a tough task up against that Brian Flores defense. So while his expert consensus ranking on Fantasy Pros is wide receiver 21, I think that's just a little bit foolish because you really are just relying heavily on the touchdown with Diggs because the target share isn't going to be magnificent. Close out the mid-tier wide receiver 2 and high-end wide receiver 3 range. Make sure you guys hit that subscribe button down below like I owed you some money. Leave a like on today's video as well. We got Judge Judy, going up against the Giants. Now, while Amari Cooper is the number 1 there, the accuracy from Deshaun Watson to Amari Cooper is terrible. The connection is negative. It's like you're fucking connected to McDonald's Wi-Fi or something. Walmart Wi-Fi. Like you're playing Call of Duty and people used to make fun of you. Oh my God, buddy's got that Walmart Wi-Fi, buddy. You live in a trailer park or some shit like that. That's just what people used to say back in the day on Call of Duty. If you know, you know. And I never really had all that great of connection. But Cooper and Sean Watson just don't have a good connection. Jerry Jeudy and him do. He scored 12 or more points in back-to-back weeks and been a top 34 wide receiver in back-to-back games. So with this matchup being great up against the Giants, I'm going to rank him a little bit higher as my wide receiver 28, technically wide receiver 27, because again, Garrett Wilson doesn't get included because he already played. Next up, we move into the high upside wide receiver 3/flex option. So once you get past the last tier, which is tier number 4, it starts to get a little bit scary. Now, even guys in the 4th tier, like Diggs, Judy, Waddle, you know, there's some scaries, some Sunday scaries in there, but now you're praying to the football gods above. With these guys and the guys below here, you need a touchdown. You really do, because the volume is suspect. George Pickens, week 1, 7 targets. Last week, 4 targets. George Pickens, again, getting fisted by like Hulk's hand by the quarterback play. Last year it was the case. This year, it is the exact same thing. Fields looks fine. But the game plan is clearly, hey, Fields, no need to chuck it up 50 yards down the field to throw it to Pickens. Let's just make all these safe maneuvers. Don't turn the ball over. We're going to run the rock efficiently, and we're going to win the game by scoring 14 points. And they could do that against the Chargers. This isn't the type of a matchup where we're going to see a firefight, a back and forth affair. The Chargers and them have the same game plan. Just don't fuck anything up offensively, play great defense, and you can win the game. This game could end 14-7, 14-10. Now that I say that, it'll be a 28-21, something crazy, right? But more than likely, it's going to end up being a lower scoring game. And with the fact that they're not going to throw the ball a bunch, just makes me feel like kind of meh on Pickens. But Pickens is good enough to take those 4 targets, 5, 6 targets to have a huge game. So that's why he gets ranked so highly. Next up, we got Deontay Johnson. Now, a lot of people are going to overreact to the Andy Dalton news and throw Deontay Johnson into a much higher tier. While I love Deontay Johnson, I will note that it's not 100% that Andy Dalton is as good as he was last year. He's another year older. He's an unk. He's old as fuck. And also, it's not a guarantee that Deontay Johnson is the number 1 there. They could still throw to Xavier, somebody touch my Leggett, as well as another unk in Adam Thielen. So while I'm going to give Deontay Johnson the respect he deserves, I'm not going to go over exorbitant and rank him way higher because it's not a guarantee he even sees the most amount of targets. Next up, we got Tank Dell. Tank Dell last week, if he catches that pass that he should have caught and probably would have scored a touchdown, we're looking at Tank Dell way differently. But that's not the reality that we live in, Doctor Strange style, right? We live in the reality where Tank Dell was the wide receiver 92 last week. So we just kind of have to calm our titties on Tank Dell. He's going to have a great game eventually. but his floor is very low, but the ceiling is still very high. Next up, we got Brian Thomas Jr., which might be the safest bet out of this grouping. Only 4 targets in back-to-back games, and the Bills' defense is incredibly underrated, but he's finished as a top 30 wide receiver in both games. The matchup alone concerns me. The fact that Trevor Lawrence has been sucking more dong than a porn star recently worries me. So that puts Brian Thomas kind of in limbo here. Xavier Worthy is exactly what I thought he was going to be. He's a 3 to 4 to 5 touch guy every week. If he takes one of those touches to the crib, you're happy. If he doesn't, he gets 2 to 5 fantasy points. So if you're ready to take the upside shot, you start him. He has some of the most upside out of anyone on this list. But the floor is not even the basement. It's like the second basement. It's below the basement. I don't even think people have second basements, but you get what I mean. Khalil, Shakira, Shakira. Oh, baby, when you talk like that, you make a woman go mad. Going up against the Jacksonville Jaguars. The Jaguars defense against the run, good. Jaguars defense against the pass, no brainer. Top 32 wide receiver in back-to-back showings. Snaps aren't there. The targets aren't high, but he does a lot with the targets. Should be reliable enough to finish in this range. Final guy here is Terry McLaurin. He gets one last opportunity, one last go before I throw him off the ship. Before I say abandon ship on Terry McLaurin, you gotta sit him. 4 targets in week 1, not great, but 8 targets last week. So if I told you, and I said the same thing in the wide receiver starts it video, if I told you Terry McLaurin had 8 targets and 6 receptions up against the fucking Giants, guess how many yards he has. Now, if you have Terry McLaurin, you know how many yards he has. But if you're not a Terry McLaurin owner, you're just listening to my takes on all these players, what would you think the stat line would be? You would probably think at least 50 yards and maybe a touchdown, right? That's what you think. The motherfucker had 6 receptions for 22 yards. He has 39 yards on the season. I think things are bound to change. I still think very highly of McLaurin's skill set. So I'm ready to give him one last chance. But this is the last chance. If he fucks things up, it's over for him. And I do like the matchup, though, against the Bengals. Final tier here. This is the don't really want to start them, but you may have to tier. Headlined by Amari Cooper. The guy has 17 targets on the season, but only 5 receptions for 27 yards. If you thought Terry McLaurin's stats were bad for the targets, Cooper's are even worse. Now, I think one of these days, the connection is bound to form. Him and Deshaun Watson have had great games in the past, especially where, I guess, Watson didn't have a great game, but with Watson in the game, Cooper put up a big fantasy performance multiple times. So, eventually, things are going to break free, but I feel a little bit more confident McLaurin doing it compared to Amari. Next up, we got Jaden Riley-Reed of the Green Bay Packers dealing with a calf injury. I expect him to go. Malik Willis under center, revenge game up against the Titans. I think the team is still going to do what they did last week, but hopefully give Jaden Reed some more touches. Jaden Reed is like Deebo Samuel light, Walmart Deebo Samuel, Tebow Deebo Samuel, but honestly, that's a little bit disrespectful due to how good Jaden Reed is, but that's a guy that doesn't need an insane amount of volume to succeed. He's a guy that could get the jet sweep and take it to the crib, but with the touchdown upside being significantly lessened, I can't rank him much higher. Next up, we got Titty Boy T. Higgins going up against the left hands up. Who are we? The Commanders, limited on Thursday with the hammy. I don't want to play him coming back off the hamstring injury, but a lot of you guys might be in a scenario where you have to play him. The game's on Monday, so my expectation is that he does play. But again, continue to monitor his health. Higgins is a guy that I think is a top 24 receiver in the National Football League. In a great matchup against the Commanders. If the matchup was worse, coming off the hammy, I would rank him lower. Final guy is Christian Kirk. Now, the team came out and outright said, we need to get Christian Kirk the ball, which makes sense. He is the best or the second best wide receiver on the team. He has just 2 catches on the season for 29 yards. Last week, he had 1 catch for -1 yards. So how can I rank him higher than this? If you wanted to start guys below him, such as Juwan Jennings, Demarcus Robinson, Vlad McConkey, Tyler Lockett, Jacoby Myers, Quentin Johnston, Brandon Cooks ahead of him. I would not judge you. This is another guy that's on his last shot. He fucks it up again. I'm done. I'm basically already done. I've kind of acknowledged that I was wrong on Christian Kirk, but for some of you, this might be his last ride again. The wide receiver rankings this week feel very weird because of how many injuries there are. Tua, thinking Tyreek at Waddle's battleship makes it feel weird to have them ranked that low. Not having A.J. Brown, not having Deebo Samuel, not having some of these wide receivers that we love makes the rankings look very, very weird. Thank you guys all so much for watching today's video. Let me know if you agree with some of the rankings. If you disagree, that's okay as well. I love you guys all so much. I hope you guys leave a like on today's video if you have enjoyed. And if you are new to the channel, make sure you guys bro fist the subscribe button. Like, my name is PewDiePie. I love you guys all so much. Make sure you check out one of the videos on your screen if you haven't seen it already. Hope you guys have a great one. And as always, good boy.